Zimmer and Peacock and PalmSense, we've decided to sort of team up again and do a webinar around electrochemistry. So what's going to happen this afternoon is I'll do a little introduction in a minute, but I think whilst we're waiting for people to join, I just want to say that there's a little poll that you can fill, a little questionnaire, and all it's going to ask you is what's the motivation for attending this afternoon? So maybe you're just bored and you want to have something entertaining to watch. That's a great motivation. Maybe you're particularly interested in coffee. I know it's a favorite with me, and you genuinely want to know about the caffeine in coffee. So we would like to hear that motivation. If your motivation is kind of more about electrochemistry and you want to know about cyclic voltammetry, then certainly put that down as your motivation. But as I say, then there is a little poll that will we want to ask you your motivations, because basically we want to be able to tailor these webinars so they're sort of super interesting, interesting and useful to you all. I'm not sure how many. Well, in fact, at the moment we have 96 people online, which is nice, and we'll just give a few more people a sort of opportunities to start. So what's going to happen? So don't forget to fill in the poll. Hopefully that's obvious enough to you. So what we're going to do this afternoon is we're going to have a presentation from Lutz. So my name is Martin Peacock. I'm one of the founders of Zimmer and Peacock. Lutz is one of the key application guys at PalmSense. He has a PhD in electrochemistry, which means he's incredibly interesting to talk to at parties. I also have a PhD in electrochemistry as well. Lutz will be introducing the electrochemistry that we're going to be doing. He's going to be talking about caffeine. He's going to be showing you some exciting structures of caffeine. He's going to be talking about oxidation and reduction. And then what's quite nice is then they have a really excellent potentiostat at PalmSense called the Sense Smart. Now, we actually have a few of those at Zimmer and Peacock, and we'll be taking one of our screen printed electrodes and we'll be putting it into the Sense Smart, and then Solrun, one of our engineers, will be doing a demonstration. So I'll just make a mental note to say to Mots, turn the gimbal on, Mots, so we're all ready. And like I say, there's a poll. If you could fill in the poll, that would be completely great. Just saying what your motivation is. If you're here to learn about food science, that's great. We'll be doing caffeine. If you want to learn about electrochemistry, that's great. We'll be doing cyclic voltammetry. And there'll be some academic material coming from Lutz, and then there'll be a live demo coming from Solrun. And just know that it's worth following us on the social media, because there'll be a video coming out afterwards where we'll integrate the screen of the Android phone that'll be running the app with the video, so you can see it a bit better, because it's sometimes hard to follow that screen in the actual video. I will be quiet now, and I think we'll hand over to Lutz. And Lutz, so really look forward to this.
Thank you, Martin, for the introduction. And yes, people do love to hear about my research at parties. They just leave all the time afterwards. So, hi, hello and welcome from me. I'm Lutz Stratmann. I'm an electrochemist at PalmSense. Well, Martin already gave you the introduction of me. So let's just get started. So we want to start with some simple, let's say, foundations with some theoretical background here. Just first question is always, when you do an experiment, like, why would that be interesting? Why is detection of caffeine interested? Well, caffeine is present in many drinks that we consume, and I think we're all aware of it. We have a high coffee consume, but you also find it in energy drinks and other beverages. But also, caffeine is present in medicine. For example, in painkillers that you take when you have a cold, sometimes there's caffeine in there to get rid of that typical tiredness you get when you're sick. So for these kind of medicines that just try to keep you functioning, they sometimes do have caffeine in there. So this means there's a significant amount of economic products that require a high quality standard. So where you need to have the detection, where you need to analyze what you're having there. Also, caffeine is the most common psychoactive drug, meaning, or psychoactive substance, meaning we find it everywhere, and psychoactive meaning it changes the way how we feel or perceive things. So it gives you this this little kick, right? That you feel awake. But be careful. There's a trade-off when you are under the influence of caffeine, usually in the fight or flight state. So maybe it's not always a good idea to pump yourself up with caffeine and then be awake and alert. Well, however, so it's the most common one. So you will rather find a beverage with caffeine in a supermarket than one with LSD. Also, it can be used as a natural insecticide. And when I use the word natural as a chemist, I do have the urge to do this because, of course, usually you would use then not caffeine that's extracted from plants, but most likely something that's synthesized or in other ways made in a cheap way. But yes, but you can use it against insects. And now to be a bit more, let's say, a bit more accurate with the science, you see here the structure of caffeine. And well, don't be too scared if you're not a chemist. It's just for completion that we have shown this. So you see here the structure of caffeine with its aromatic rings and some multiple different atoms in there, not only carbon and oxygen, but also we have, for example, nitrogen in here. And what we're going to do is we're going to oxidize caffeine. So we're going to take away electrons. So because oxidation is the loss of electrons, so we're going to take away a few electrons, and this way get caffeine oxidated. And we're not doing that with another chemical. What we're doing electrochemistry, so we're having an electrode, and the electrode is taking away the electrons from the caffeine, and this is what we're going to measure. This is what we want to see. Now, food samples, as we're going to use them today, they always have certain challenges. For example, they're usually a complex matrix. So often in food, you don't only have like one thing, but you have a mixture of different, well, even types or types of substances. So you have fat in there, you have protein, you have different ions, you might even have polymers in there. And then you might have redox active species in there as well. So other species who like to be reduced or oxidized. So this makes it quite difficult to not have any interferences in your measurement. So you don't have other substances where the oxidation or reduction is so close to the reaction of your analyte that it's changing the outcome of your measurement. Also, another problem is biofouling, and that means that film is growing or other substances are just blocking the electrode. And to overcome these challenges, we can choose different approaches. So one is sample preparation. So for example, if we extract our analyte from a food sample, right? Let's say, I don't know, if you want to look at certain, let's say, certain substances that you get when you fry potatoes, you might want to puree your potatoes and put them in certain solvents and shake them, etc. That's way too much work. We don't want that. It is a way of doing it, but it's not very handy for like a point of care or for like an on-site measurement with a portable device. That's not really handy. Membranes are another option where you cover the electrode and protect it from species that you're not interested in, but the membrane needs then to be permeable for the analyte you're interested in. Also, selective electrodes are a good approach. For example, the last time we have shown you a glucose measurement with an electrode that was modified with glucose oxidase, which is an enzyme that is very selectively only reacting with glucose. Another option are one-shot electrodes to avoid biofouling, so you don't grow film because you use the electrode one time and you throw it away. Okay, that is a bit the challenge for food samples, and today we want to look at two food samples. And why have we chosen these type of food samples? Well, we've chosen an energy drink because energy drinks allow you to have are like a controlled media. The ingredients are in there and nothing else. And the ingredients are usually quite clear because this is an artificially made beverage. We don't take a fruit from a tree and squeeze it out. With coffee, it's more complex because not only do we take the coffee bean and make an extraction of that, no, we roast it before, creating even more different molecules because the different molecules that have been in there before are now in different oxidation states, etc. So there we have a mixture of multiple organic compounds, which is nice because they do give different flavors and they do give aroma, so you can nicely smell it and feel homely with your coffee. However, for a measurement, it's not very nice if you have a mixture of unknown substances. So this is a bit more of a challenge. Well, how are we going to do our electrochemical detection? What do you require for electrochemical detection? Well, so first of all, you need your sample. It should be in a solution, and a solution is usually better. There are ways to measure solid samples, but most of them end up to being extractions of the solid sample. Like when you have soil measurements, often you put the soil in another solvent and extract what you want to measure. But however, so we have liquid samples this time, which is very handy. We have our electrodes, so you need an interface where the reaction that you're using for the detection is going to take place. This time we're using the Z&P hypervalue carbon electrodes, so they do have a carbon interface, and and they're made by Zimmer and Peacock. As a potentiostat, we're using the Sensit Smart, and a potentiostat is now the device that will apply the potential and control the potential at the electrodes so that the reaction can happen and at the same time measure the current. Then we have a software and a computer to control the potentiostat, and in our case we can use a smartphone with our app PS Touch. And what you can see here is also the explanation why you see today two companies working together for this webinar. You have PalmSense, and we are responsible here for the electronics and the potentiostats, so for the instrument and the software controlling it. While Zimmer and Peacock has the knowledge about the chemistry, has a firm grip on the electrochemistry, on the electrode production, so like quality control, reproducibility, what electrode is suitable for which application, etc. Okay, so just to give you a bit more information on the Sensit Smart, it is a potentiostat that has roughly the size of a USB stick, although USB sticks today are even smaller, so of a USB stick from 10 years ago. And it's based on the MSTED Pico, which is an OEM module for electrochemistry. So it's like a chip potentiostat. And it can be easily plugged into a smartphone for powering and communication and control. And it can perform all the important electrochemical techniques like cyclic voltammetry, square wave voltammetry, chronoamperometry, and even electrochemical impedance spectroscopy. Well, but this is supposed to be about caffeine measurements, so if you want to know more, just visit www.palmsense.com. Yes, what are we going to do today is cyclic voltammetry. And just a very brief introduction. So what we're doing here is we're making a linear sweep, so we're increasing in a linear way our potential over time with a defined slope, which is the scan rate, and then at specific potential, the vertex potential, we are using now the same slope, but times -1. So we're going in the opposite direction, but with the same slope. And what then happens is the following. If we have chosen these potentials in a smart way, and the substance that we're interested in has the point where it oxidizes or reduces, in this potential range, we will see first an increase in current when we provide enough potential, so enough driving force for the reaction to happen. And then we see a decrease in potential because we are depleting that species that we're using for the reaction in front of the electrode. Right, and then if the reaction is reversible, which not all reactions are, but if it's reversible, you would see when you go back this negative reducing current. And what you then do is usually you're not plotting these two over time, but you're plotting it versus potential. So you plot the current versus the potential to make a voltammogram. And yes, so this is then the voltammogram, and usually they have very distinctive shape. So in the past they were talking about, they were saying that cyclic voltammetry is the spectroscopy of the electrochemist, because you were getting these characteristic shapes that you could compare between different compounds. However, nowadays we have electrochemical impedance spectroscopy, so maybe that's more the spectroscopy of the electrochemist. But just to give you an idea that we work here with a rather visual technique. Okay. Now, as a last thing, I would just like to tell you what settings we're doing, so we don't have to go through it in detail when we are actually in the lab. So in our app PS Touch, you can set which technique you want, and as I said, we're going to use cyclic voltammetry. We're going to set our current ranges, which are 1 microampere to 1 milliampere, and the current range is basically defining how sensitive the potentiostat is. So at a low current range, you can measure low currents very well resolved. However, if you have the larger currents, the potentiostat can't handle that anymore. Modern potentiostats usually have auto-ranging. That means you can choose multiple current ranges, just like here for the Sense Smart. And the potentiostat will change the current range if they think that's necessary. Then we have an equilibration time, so waiting time of 0 seconds, which makes the measurement also a bit quicker. We begin the scan at -100 millivolts. We go up to 1.2 volts, right? And then we would turn again at, so the second vertex potential where we would, if we would make multiple scans, like flip again, the scan rate is again the -100 millivolts. However, we're just doing one scan. And as a scan rate, so how quick we change the potential with time, we're changing it with 100 millivolts per second. And this is already everything we need to perform this experiment. So I would like now to leave you in the hands of Solren, who will perform the experiment with you.
Hey, so my name is Solren. Thank you for the introduction, Alex. And now I will demonstrate how we will detect the caffeine in different beverages, as Martin and Liz has already told us. So we have the very neat Sense Smart, and we will insert it into our smartphone like that. And then we will access PalmSense's PS Touch, and we will insert one of Zimmer and Peacock's screen printed electrodes, and be sure to align the lines like this, and then we will start off with measuring PBS. But first, we need to change the method so that we have cyclic voltammetry, and we will set the parameters, like Lutz said, to 1 microamps to 1 milliamp, and then we will change the cyclic voltammetry settings. We will start with -0.1 volts, and then we will cycle up to 1.2 volts, and then we will go back down to -0.1 volts. Each step is fine with 0.01, and our scan rate should be 0.1 volts per second. And then we will go to plot, and we will start the measurement. Be sure to cover all the electrodes with the solution, and then we will hit play. So this solution right now, this is just a blank solution, it's just a buffer. So it doesn't contain caffeine. So as Lutz said, he said that normally we would oxidize the caffeine molecule, and then we will. Okay, I just need to check whether we have the. Let's see.
Just check your settings. Yeah, you might have just put the settings in slightly wrong. So no issues. It was an interesting comment. Somebody just made an interesting comment about, if you want to validate an electrochemical assay like this, then you want to run, something like an HPLC. So you would make the sort of standard, let's say, caffeine samples, and you would test them both by HPLC, that's high pressure liquid chromatography, and you would also then test them by electrochemistry, and then kind of come up with essentially with a calibration curve where you know, electrochemical signal versus HPLC, either area under curve or peak, and that would be a good way of validating it. So once you check your settings, Lauren, if you're ready, that's great. I'll do what I'm good at, just closing my mouth. But if you...
Yeah, I'm ready for you.
All right, sweet.
Right now, we started new measurements, and I think actually what you saw was that I said that it's important to align the lines of the sensor with the SenseSmart Smart, which I didn't.
It looks crooked. It looks crooked, yeah.
Yeah, that was to show you guys what happens when you don't do it properly. So it was all planned for. But now I aligned the lines. So you can see, if you look at the sensor, it has like 3 lines that are connected to each of the electrodes. And also on the SenseSmart Smart, it has 3 lines. So you just need to be sure to align those. So that was a small glitch from me there. And here you see the voltogram of PBS. And now we will move on to the one for coffee. So we'll remove that and put this in. And we will insert our sensor into coffee. Like that. And then we'll hit play and we'll choose overlay so that we get the scans right next to each other so that they're easy to compare. And what you see now is that the current is increasing quite a lot compared to that for PBS. So we're measuring the current by varying the potential. And here you see, yeah, that we have a far greater current for the different oxidation peaks for coffee compared to PBS. Yeah. And then we will move on to Red Bull. And we will hit play yet again, put an overlay there. Yep. And yet again, you see with this curve coming here, the oxidation peaks are higher than the PBS, but they're lower than that for coffee. And for Red Bull, we have a concentration of caffeine that is approximately 32 milligrams per 100 milliliter. But for coffee, we have from 50 to 100. I pulled a cup of coffee from our coffee machine downstairs. So I don't know the exact concentration, but at least the currents here are related to the concentration in our solution. Yes, so back to you, Martin.
Yeah, cool. Thanks very much. So we are going to have a Q&A session in a bit. I also think there's another poll that will be available to the attendees, and the poll will ask the question, what would you like to see maybe at a next webinar? So this is the second webinar that we've done, and we got a nice response from the first one, so it motivated us to do a second one. I'm seeing actually a lot of questions flashing up now. I mean, I was probably looking in the wrong place, but I realized there might be even like, you know, a lot of questions. So anyway, so we're gonna have a Q&A session at the moment, but I maybe just sort of summarize what we've seen. So first of all, I think Lutz put it very well that cyclic voltammetry for me is really just it's absorption spectroscopy, but the electrochemical equivalent. So, you know, you essentially get you run a experiment, you get some peaks, and those peaks should be indicative of the molecule or the sample of interest. So when we did PBS, it was actually very boring. There was not much features to it, but as soon as we went towards the coffee or the Red Bull, then you started getting some peaks. And there were a few questions like, shouldn't you clean the electrode? Yeah, you should clean the electrode, but we didn't for today. But no, these are relevant questions. So I encourage you to ask questions. And so, like I said, there's a poll. So please fill the poll out, because if we're not going to answer your question today, or you didn't see something that you want to see, then fill in the poll. You know, if you want us to do other types of foods, please put that in there. If you want us to do more stuff around electrochemistry and dig in a bit deeper on the electrochemistry, fill in and put that in there. I can see people asking very technical questions about ranges, and we'll be happy to answer those. And I would say this as well. We at ZP, we do come across a lot of people who are very interested in developing electronics. Even if you are developing electronics, I'd encourage you to get something like the Sense Smart, because unless you have what we call the golden standard, i.e. something that works, it's very hard to develop anything, because you need to know, you need to have something that at least works, so then you can compare yours versus theirs. So I know there's a few people out there who like to design very super low cost electronics for biosensors. Even in those cases, get something that works, because then you can sort of base your electronics on that. And I just saw an interesting question come through about toxins, and somebody was interested about corrosion. So I'll be quiet now, RD, and remind everyone to do that poll, which is, what do you want us to speak about next time? Or on heavy metals as well. Very interesting.
Yeah, thank you very much, Martin. And thanks everyone for asking all the questions. I see there are a lot of them coming in. Let's start with the first one. I think this one is perfect for Lutz. Lutz, can you use the PalmSense 4, which is another product from PalmSense, for caffeine measurements?
Yes. So the PalmSense 4 is actually more powerful than the Sense Smart. So usually everything the Sense Smart can do, the PalmSense 4 can do as well. But it's a bigger device. It's a bigger device. It has Bluetooth integrated. It has a battery integrated. It has a higher potential range you can go to. However, for this type of experiment that we wanted to show today, like how you can do an easy on-site measurement, it is a bigger potentiostat. It makes it look a bit more, let's say, chunky. However, you can use that as well. And I have seen people making, in the comments, I've seen people also making that comment that they say like, oh, I would rather use a droplet than having my potentiostat so close to the solution. That is possible as well. I mean, it always depends on your system and diffusion limitations, how well your solution will form a droplet, etc. And that is with the PalmSense 4 also nice, because we have a holder that you can like detach to the front of it, and then you have already like your electrode in a horizontal manner that you can put a droplet on it. I mean, the same would be possible if Solron just lies the tablet flat on the table and enter the Sense Smart. But there's usually not as nicely visible as when you put it in a stand. I think this was more reasons of show than it was a scientific reason to put it above the solution. But maybe Solron can comment on that.
Yeah, Solron is coming back.
Can you put the webinar back on the screen?
Yeah, it was definitely for sure. It's easier with a stand rather than holding it myself, especially when I speak, so that I wouldn't dip the really nice Sense Smart into the solution. So to be able to focus on several things, I use the stand for today.
And it's probably worth saying that most of the time when we're testing in the lab, we're actually pipetting the samples onto the electrodes. So, whereas today we're dipping that sensor into the solution, that's actually quite rare for us. We've generally got the electrode in a kind of, and the phone in the horizontal, and we're, essentially pipetting something like less than 30 microliters onto the end of the electrode and just doing it that way. So some of these questions are very relevant, but what we're doing today is for show. But it's, the beauty about screen printed electrodes and about electrochemistry in general is you don't need large samples. 1 drop of blood should be enough. So we tend not to dip the sensors so much. We do quite like to bring the sample to the sensor by using a pipette.
Exactly. All right. Yeah, Lutz.
Martin, was there a specific reason that we chose dipping this time? It's just for the show, right? You could have also done it with a droplet, right?
No, I've done it with droplets plenty of times. So the quick answer is, Lutz, there's absolutely no reason not to have just done it by the droplet. And I've actually got YouTube videos about me doing it using droplets as well.
All right. Thank you. And I see also lots of comments coming in on the poll. So other things and other topics the next webinar should be about. So thank you all. Another question, this is for you, Martin. Are there any ZMP electrodes that are 510C compliant? as you know.
Yeah, I was just looking up that the definition of it, because I was trying to recognize what it was. I wasn't sure if this was the quick answer is I was just googling 510C. I know what a 510K is, which is an FDA regulatory, let's say, procedure, but I don't know what a 510C is. Is that disposal of electronic goods? Ardy, do you recognize the 510C? Because I don't think I do. Or was it
Mr. Evans can explain a bit more what he means with that question. So let's quickly go to the next one. All right. And there is another question. This one is, I think, for both of you could be. So let's see who's the first to react. How do we know that the current is due to the caffeine oxidation only?
No, and I think I mean, this is for show, and I agree with that statement. So the quick answer is to really do this more robustly. You know, as you already probably know, we really have to buy in some caffeine or just do a neat caffeine. And so what we're going to find out is in that broad oxidation peak, there's actually several compounds in there, and actually there'll be one compound, caffeine will be in there, but it's not. The broadness of the peak is due to many molecules in there. Now the question could be, well, what's the specificity in that case? And I think I saw an interesting comment from somebody using HPLC earlier on. What you want to do is actually make up a series of solutions of caffeine and do the electrochemistry and do the HPLC and compare them, make sure you've got, a genuine signal. And then I would actually take real coffee, run it on the electrochemical sensor and run it on the HPLC and and this sounds like fairy dust, but actually use AI to allow you to identify features in the electrochemical signal, which is going to pick up everything. And you would run AI on that signal versus what the true answer is from the HPLC, and actually use AI to allow you to deconvolute essentially the broadness and the non-specific signal to say there are features in this signal that are actually indicative of the caffeine by HPLC. And we've been doing that quite a lot of recent. So the quick answer is you're absolutely right. How do you know it's just caffeine? You don't, but you can deconvolute it, but we haven't done that today. What I did describe with the AI is how do you turn this into an actual product.
Martin, I know that you have actually a lot of rather selective electrodes in your portfolio. Maybe you can give some examples, like how you do it there, how you assure or how you make your electrodes selective for certain analytes. Just an example that you have an idea.
Yeah, so if we were really trying to make a very caffeine specific sensor, I think I've actually seen people have made aptamers for caffeine. So that would be a way of doing it. So that's a more complicated assay now, because you have to functionalize the electrode to be, to be specific towards caffeine. Now, how we bring specificity into our sensors is, we either identify often an aptamer or an antibody that's specific to the target. We do that a lot. Or we just identify an enzyme that's specific to the target. So the classic, obviously, is glucose sensing. But the questioner is correct that you can't guarantee this broadness of signal is not all due to caffeine. It's due to the other colored molecules in the coffee as well. But how do we do it? We build specificity to the sensor using aptamers or antibodies most often. We also do it with enzymes, but we also now do it with using a lot of data science. So the biggest fastest growing group at Zimmer and Peacock is data scientists, because you can deconvolute signals, and electrochemistry has traditionally not done this. They've kind of made the sensor do all the work, but these days you can make an okay sensor and back it up with some pretty good signal analysis. So the quick answer is you build the specificity onto the sensor. It only takes you so far, and then you have to use good data science to extract the actual signal from the background signal.
All right, thank you. And Martin, is the measurement also pH sensitive?
Yeah, I definitely think it's pH sensitive. Absolutely is the quick answer. Many of these organic molecules where they've got these heteroatoms, so we had nitrogen and oxygen, and that oxidation is sensitive to pH. So, for example, the more alkali it is, it will become oxygen will get deprotonated oxygens are easier to oxidize. So the quick answer is yes, it will be pH sensitive, and you would probably want to fix the pH of the coffee. So what we would do is we would take 1 volume of coffee and mix it with 4 volumes of buffer, and then do the analysis. So that would be one way of controlling the pH. For example, if you were trying to make a low-cost point in field tester for caffeine.
All right, great. And let's get back to the 510C, which actually should be 510K, and it's a clearance from the US Food and Drug Administration. It's you have to register, and the question was if the electrode you were using is actually registered for that.
No, so I understand the question now. That's what I thought. I know what a 510K is. So just for anyone who doesn't know, a 510K is if there's a predicative device that's already on the market. So for example, if there's a glucose sensor on the market and you want to launch your glucose sensor on the market, you can show equivalence between them and say, therefore, I can now enter the market. So I believe that's what a 510K is. So Zimmer and Peacock, we have products on the market that are FDA approved, but we haven't done any of them by 510K. So the quick answer is no, we haven't made our glucose sensor, which would be the classic 510K, and we haven't got it FDA approved, and therefore, no, it's not 510K, let's say, approved. But I do understand the question, let's say. So that's what I thought. I thought that's what the question was.
Great. Yep. And then another one: does the immersion level or droplet size affect the current magnitude?
Lutz, do you want me to do it, or do you want to do it?
Oh, I can do it. I mean, usually for what's important is that all 3 electrodes of the sensor are covered. So you have your reference, counter, and working electrode, and all 4 need to be in the same solution, in the same droplet. So your droplet needs to be big enough to cover this. Then it gets more complicated. The question is, does the amount of reaction you make change the whole volume or not? My experience is that for most experiments, the amount of substance that's actually converted is not significant for the bulk. So for everything that's a bit further away from the solution. So most of the time, if you use like a droplet, if you use on a, let's say on a 2 or 3 millimeter diameter circular electrode, right? You have a disc electrode and it's like 2 or 3 millimeter diameter. Then I use 50 to 100 microliters, and I don't see a difference between the bulk and the droplet version. So if I immerse it or if I put a droplet on it, it doesn't really matter. It gives the same results. I don't have like examples in my mind where it would matter, but I would in general advise that if you make a calibration curve, always make your calibration curve with the same method that you intend to use for your real application then. So if you want to do droplets, do your calibration curve with droplets. However, I expect that like 50 microliters plus for most substances look exactly the same as if you would have immersed it into the solution.
I might be able to give you a funny answer on that. If you scan fast, when you scan a cycle of voltammetry very fast, you build up, you sample very close to the electrode, very close. So it doesn't matter what the rest of the volume is because you're only sampling very close to the electrode. When you scan slowly, you're essentially starting to sense the overall volume. So whether volume matters or not really depends on scan rate. But as Lutz says, anecdotally, 50, 100 microliters is more than enough volume for most of these 3 millimeter diameter electrodes. So that's correct. If you did a really slow experiment, you might find the volume becoming part of the signal. But something like 100 millivolts or something that's quite fast, so it wouldn't affect your signal. But there is almost a relationship. Fast experiment, small volume sampled, doesn't matter what the rest of the volume is. That would be like a rule of thumb.
There is actually a funny, well, not funny, but an interesting trivia fact, if you want to. The glucose measurements that you're used to, where you have like the stripe and you hold it to a droplet of blood and then it sucks in a defined volume, right? So that's what it does. It has a defined volume then inside this electrode, and the reaction is running then inside. And actually there, the reaction is always so long that it consumes everything in the volume. That's the idea. And then they calculate what was in that volume, instead of doing what you find in many other electrochemical experiments, that they look at the current. They actually look at the charge, because they assumed that they have consumed everything that is in this volume, and this way calculate the concentration. The advantage of doing it this way is that, for example, if you're measuring in Thailand at 36 degrees, or if you're measuring at Norway at 10 degrees, wouldn't matter, because you just have the experiment running long enough that if the enzyme is a bit slower or faster, it doesn't matter.
All right, great. Thank you, Lutz. Martin, I have two more questions for you. One is a short one, and another one is a longer one about cleaning. The short one, what is the material used for the working electrode for sensing caffeine?
Yeah, so Lutz was kind enough to say what's good about ZP is we know our chemistry and our electrochemistry quite well. So caffeine is quite an aromatic compound. It's got lots of carbon rings, in it. So when you see that kind of thing, then generally carbon is good enough. So in this particular experiment, we were using carbon. If the output of the reaction that we were trying to analyze was hydrogen peroxide, it wouldn't have worked. We would have had to have used platinum or gold there. But specifically in this example, it was a carbon working electrode. And if anyone wants to have fun with me, just Google me about, contact us and talk about graphene, because I know everyone loves a bit of graphene these days. So that was one of the questions, Ardy.
Yeah, perfect. And the other one was about what procedure do you recommend for the cleaning of the screen-treated electrode?
I think with these hypervalue electrodes, the procedure I suggest, it's just to throw them away. Now, they're 99 cents each. So I do understand that, in some economies, that's quite a lot. In some other economies, it's not too bad. But the carbon electrodes, we haven't found an amazing procedure for cleaning them. The problem with cleaning is you're essentially eroding the surface. So you're changing the surface. So next time you go to use the electrode, you might have a slightly rougher electrode, and therefore its sensitivity will appear higher. So with a carbon, it's actually quite hard to recommend a cleaning procedure other than just cleaning it with a bit of tissue. But I can't absolutely recommend it because we don't do it a lot. We just unfortunately throw them away. If it was gold or platinum, we actually sometimes polish them just like we would a disc electrode with some slurry. But again, we don't do it too much. I mean, most of our workflows are, we're making biosensors that sample goes on, the patient gets the results, and the sensor's thrown away. So we don't want to be in the job of recycling electrodes, because every time you recycle, you change the surface, and then, the surface is changing with time, and the signal will therefore change. So we do slurry cleaning. If it's gold electrodes, we do clean with like 10 millimolar HCl. If it's carbon electrodes, we might just clean them with a little bit of tissue. But it's not the same as disc electrodes where you can kind of, polish them with some slurry. It's, I don't have and for example, some assays that we do, the organic molecules bind to the carbon and you're never going to get them off. That's just the end of it. And I think the chili sensor that we make is a good example of that. The chili polymerizes to the surface and we can never get it off. So you can't recycle them.
Martin, how is it if you want to clean them before you make a modification, right? If you're buying it for a research project and you want to immobilize your aptamers or anything, like how do you usually prepare the electrodes for that? Like there's usually a cleaning step involved in that as well, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I do some, webinars every Thursday at 8 a.m. London time. And we do answer that question quite a bit. We take our electrode, we do cyclic voltammetry and ferrocyanide, just to characterize it. But in doing that, that's really a cleaning step. So the quick answer is we have a workflow where we take the bare electrodes, we characterize the bare electrodes using cyclic voltammetry. But you could argue that's also a cleaning step. And then we go on to do the actual, let's say we were going to, do some modification of the surface after that. So I suppose the quick answer is we confirm the cleanliness of the surface using something like 5 to 10 millimolar ferrocyanide.
All right, that's clear. Lutz, a question for you. Is the sensor application, or if the sensor application, does it support iPhone and iPads as well?
Not from us. No, we don't have a ready end-user software for Apple systems. at the moment. What we do have is we have coding examples for the iOS system, because as I mentioned before, the SenseIt Smart is based on the Emstead Pico. And the Emstead Pico is an OEM potentiostat. That means we think people will build it into their own devices. And this means they also will want to do their own software. And of course, you don't want to make this very difficult for your customer, right? If we already know they want to make their own software, we should give them the tools to do that. We've done that in the past, like for many of our instruments, you can have software development kits. But with the Emstead Pico, we started like a new way of doing these with an extra programming language called MethodScript, which makes it very easy to work on many different platforms. And on our website, you can find a lot of coding examples for MethodScript, and among these is also one for iOS. And that is like enough of a user interface of a GUI that you can use to actually control the SenseIt Smart or the Emstead 4S already. So in this sense, so indirectly, yes, we have, but not. We don't have some things, an end-user software like PS Touch for Android or PS Trace for Windows. We don't have an equivalent for that for the iOS systems at the moment.
All right, thank you. Yeah, we've been to almost all questions, and we're a bit over time as well. So I would like to thank everyone for their questions. If you still have another question, you can always contact either Zimmer and Peacock or PalmSense without any problems. So thank you all for attending, and yeah, I'll see you for the next webinar.
Thanks, Ardy.
All right, bye-bye, everyone.
Cheers. Cheers, everyone.